Tuesday, May 28th, 2024. Mike and Sean are not here, but we have a quorum, so we'll get started.
All right, can we just give Sean just a minute or two? I just got an email from him 3 minutes ago saying he's trying to get on the Teams. Is John coming in here?
John Covey, he was just here.
Okay, we need, no, Sean is trying to get on the meeting.
I'll message Ryan right now.
Okay. And then, if you are, sorry about that, I just want to make sure we got everything. Yeah.
Okay, as usual, we're joined by people who are online, either on the phone or WebEx. All those who are do this electronically and mute your devices when you're speaking, when you're not speaking. And when you do speak, state your name for clarity of the record. All right, I'll move on to the 15-minute public comment period. Any members of the public here tonight that would like to speak? Everybody on, Simone?
We have Joe in the audience.
Joe? Okay. All right, I'll ask again, are there any members of the public on tonight that would like to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. The minutes for your board package, I'll have a chance to read them. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bob. Is there any, all right, is there any discussion on the minutes? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries, the minutes are approved. Okay. I'll move on to the information and updates, which we have the financial update first. Are there any questions or comments on the financial update? I didn't have any, all right. And the leadership team template was provided this afternoon to the board. If everyone's had a chance to take a look at the leadership team template, let the record show that Michael has arrived. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening. Games today. There's a cool right there.
On to the financial, do you have any questions on the financial update in the board packet? No. All right, are there any questions on the leadership team template? I'll ask again. Are there any questions or comments on the leadership team template? All right, I didn't see Hale Mill in there. Was Hale, did I just go by it? Was Hale Mill discussed in there, or they off the table?
Yeah, that should be in here.
You probably wondering why.
You know, Hale Mill's the ebb and flow project. So, you know, it moves ahead, then it slows down, then it moves ahead. We're ahead of the game with all of these.
So talking to that person.
We communicated with them more recently.
Very well.
No new news.
No new news. Okay, very good. All right. All right. Well, if there's no questions or comments on the leadership team template, we'll move on to the CMEC update, which is me. Second. All right. All right. The CMEC board met on April 25th and May 23rd. The April 25th meeting was held at Dominion Millstone Power Station in Waterford, where Michael O'Connor from Dominion provided a whole history of the plant, which includes 3 separate nuclear power plants. Millstone 1, which is now in cold storage or abandoned. Millstone 2, which produces 900 megawatts, and Millstone 3, which produces 1,300 megawatts. Mr. O'Connor provided a brief overview of the operation of the reactors, which operate quite differently than reactors on submarines. Whereas submarine reactors use control rods to vary power, use highly enriched uranium, land-based reactors use control rods as an on-off switch, essentially. And the control of the reaction is done with concentrations of boron that are varied based on the life of the fuel. As the fuel is depleted, they decrease the concentration of boron to keep the output constant. And the fuel is 5% enriched uranium that requires refueling every 18 months. Submarine reactors do not require refueling for the life of the ship. So totally different operation, but it's extremely safe because the control rod, nothing mechanical can happen to the reaction. It's all controlled by boron. Nothing can run away. It's safe as can be. Mr. O'Connor took questions from the assembled group, followed by a plant tour, which I found very interesting. We were brought to the Millstone 3 turbine room, which contains 4 steam turbines ganged together to drive a single electric generator. And as an engineer, I was very impressed standing next to a machine that puts out 1,300 megawatts. We toured the plant grounds, which include the Millstone 3 reactor building, which silently produces 3,700 megawatts 24/7. We also saw the 34 kV transformers that feed the grid. And lastly, we walked past the waste heat discharge lagoon, I call it. The combined waste heat from Millstone 2 and 3 steam cycles is about 4,100 megawatts, just carried away with 1 million gallons per minute of Long Island Sound water that is pumped to heat exchangers and arrives at the discharge lagoon about 20 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the inlet. That's a lot of heat to throw away, but that's as good as you're going to get with a steam plant that are only 35% efficient. The May meeting, CMEC made public an adjustment to the community solar garden project earnings, where a mysterious $5 million was at. And the mystery, of course, was hinted to last month, related to a major settlement that was reached with Tesla to address poor performance of the solar garden. Starting with a notice of default in October 2019, CMEC has gone back and forth with Tesla to renegotiate a very bad PPA that the former CEO agreed to. With the settlement and revised PPA, CMEC will recoup approximately $20 million over the life of the contract, the $5 million being retroactive from 2019. The $20 million recoup is a significant accomplishment for David Meisinger and the CMEC team. However, the solar garden is still projected to lose $1 million per year, or roughly 1/2 of the current $2 million yearly loss. So they cut the loss in half, which is very good and a very good accomplishment for CMEC, but it's still a losing project, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, when you say losing, there's benefits to the carbon side and green energy. So it's good to have that in the portfolio. It just costs significantly more than buying off the grid. So when you look at from a pure dollar and cent side, loser, probably could have negotiated something better when they created it. But, you know, it is what it is. And that's in the portfolio for the next 15 years.
Well, I think that's one of the real keys. I mean, the purchase power agreement that was negotiated when it was first built was very substandard. And they renegotiated now with Tesla, who's now the owner of it. There used to be Brightfields, which I believe Tesla acquired. But I don't think the negotiation resulted in a sort of best of market agreement. It's still not the best agreement in the world, but it's way better than what it was. So I think the thing works efficiently, relatively efficiently. It's just the question of how much we pay for the power and how that number got approved.
I wasn't around for that.
Yeah, I would not. Yeah,
We weren't. No.
So that $5 million they settled in the lawsuit, does that go back to CMEC?
Yeah, it's already, it'll come back in the next 2 months.
Yeah, so 26% us.
Yeah. So it'll be a total of $20 million that gets recouped, and we'll get 26% of that for us. So that's good. So that was a good outcome.
And it just rolls into lowering wholesale costs.
Okay, that's all I had. Any questions or comments on the CMEC report?
I'll just make one comment. CMEC has moved to quarterly in-person meetings, and I think it's a great thing to be able to sit down, do a nice tour, or have, at least meet face to face. I think it's moving in the right direction, and it's not easy for the Norwalk people to come all the way up here, or people from here to go all the way down to the Norwalks, or meet in the middle, but at least 4 times a year, we're going to be doing that. So that's a good thing.
One of the things that was left off here was during the question and comment period, at least one person asked about the what do you call those, the small modular reactors that are talked about. And according to Mr. O'Connor, he said that Dominion's looked at them and he said they're really not ready for prime time right now. So you could use, I think about 30 of them could put out about 600 megawatts, something like that. So you could replace Millstone 1 with these small reactors. But the technology just isn't quite there yet for them to, to move on. So that may happen someday, but it's not going to happen in the next 5 years from.
In November, he said it's possible that they're looking at that.
So they're looking
They
at
don't
it.
want to be, they don't want to be the first.
They don't want to be the first.
But at least
Yeah. If you look at some of the other companies that started to go new nuclear and the cost became significantly more regulatory reasons why, among others. And St. Cooper almost went bankrupt.
So all very interesting. The other interesting thing about that plan is they have armed guards and a lot of barbed wire. So holy cow, it's like a high security prison getting in and out of there. Holy cow. So, all right, we'll move on to the financial and audit subcommittee update, and ask Mr. Goldblatt to report out.
Well, we have plans to have an in-depth discussion on the handicap cost of electrons and gas. We haven't had that meeting. So I don't have anything to report to that. We're going to have some other areas. I think we're going to review the KPIs of that meeting.
So you didn't have the meeting, is that what you're saying?
No.
Or you had a meeting?
No, we did, Mike, and we went over KPIs and we went over the funds at CMEC and our rate stabilization tools that we
Well, I
can use.
apologize. When did you have the meeting?
We had it,
It was, the 5th or the 7th, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, okay. I probably away. I chopped off the face of the planet after the tax season. So I apologize.
Yeah, there you go.
For not being. If anybody else was there that would like to, say anything. Great.
there was probably more material as you reported that. It was kind of a fire hose meeting, so there was a lot we covered. Any comments from you, Bob?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we spent a significant amount of time on rate stabilization, savings, and so forth. I don't need to spend some more time on that. I think that's a critically important action for us to monitor and take action on. And I'm still a little confused about things, but so I think we're going to do that at the next meeting as well.
Okay, next meeting is in the September timeframe, early September. And we can have that and then have a more summarized view of the entire board in the September meeting, because we'll be talking about what we're looking at for PGA, PPA going into the winter heating and cooling system. Not cooling system, heating system.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, well, we've got several strategic presentations this evening. The first one will be a sewer rate change schedule, and I'll ask Laura Huron to provide that.
So when we did the 3-year rate track, we said because of the uncertainties of a large construction project, the sewer plant, that we would be looking at this annually versus a 3-year. And Laura will go over what our schedule is and what we're doing with the board as we get closer to the fall and we can put the next rate in place.
Chris, any updates you don't want to, based on the end of the legislative session, whether we any more money?
Yeah, so we will not be getting any additional money this year, unfortunately. Short session, tough session, yeah.
We'll go back each year.
Absolutely. And our legislators worked hard, but in this session where they weren't going to change the budget, it was very difficult.
In Chris's weekly update a couple weeks ago, week before last, the legislature decided not to reopen the budget, which is very unusual, and that dramatically narrowed the opportunities. And even in the implementing bill, there was much more competition for those sort of out of the way, quick and easy decisions. And I know I was in touch with our lobbyists repeatedly. They pushed and pushed and pushed, and there just was not the time or the opportunity to find a place for us to get more money. But they're did everything they could, certainly the chairman of the appropriations committee has got as much influence as anyone. We'll just have to keep that.
Any other big sewer projects going on the state? Any other big projects going on?
Larry, you got the NBC, Bridgeport hasn't started yet, so.
Sounds good.
And, you know, with their big, tunnel they had to do and all of the separation work and storage they're doing.
How much they got?
So they're over top.
Borrowed over $3 billion. That's what the B, not an M.
Almost fixed on it.
And that's why we're very fortunate to be able to get Arthur's forward when they're tapping that much of the resources for the state defense.
So the schedule you have in front of you, at the board meeting on June 25th, we'll have the cost of service and rate design presentation. Baker Tilly will be here and do that presentation in conjunction with the finance team. At the July board meeting, we'll look to the board to set the rate hearing. That will get noticed in the newspaper August 5th, and the public hearing will be at the August board meeting. We'll request a vote at the September board meeting, and they will get published, all those rates, on September 29th for an effective date of November 1. So this is our schedule for this year's sewer rate change.
All right,
You're already.
Yeah, end of the year already. I'm already planning for November.
So give us a hint. I mean, are we talking about, when we set the rates, we talked about a proposed 8-year, 12.5%, I want to say, rate increase each year, which would effectively mean 100% rate increase in 8 years. Are we talking about going up further, going down further? You're going to be reconfirming that? What?
So we looked at a couple of different options. What we would need to do for a rate in order to meet rate of return when the plant is in service. We looked at what it would be if we scale that out a little bit, and we looked at what it would be if we continued the current track.
Okay.
And it's definitely still going to be an increase, and we have some options. The best way to handle this, in my opinion, and with the support of the Baker Tilly team, is to find a way to give us the rate increase that we need to cover all of our requirements, specifically our state funding requirements, mitigate that risk there for anything as unpleasant as technical defaults, but also minimize the impact over time for our customers. So maybe spread the rate increases out over a longer period of time.
Final numbers will be available in that summer time frame. We're still assessing all the fine details, and we'll have options for the board to address. But we're in the ballpark.
I mean, I think the thing we have to all keep in mind is that we have to do the project. It's an important project. We have to pay for it. And it is going to result in a significant rate increase over time for sewer users. But sewer rates are not that high as a portion of the overall bill.
It's definitely smaller than electric,
Yeah,
but
so-
this will bring them up.
Yeah,
And
Over time,
every one of the
considerably.
10,000 sewer customers is saving dramatically on electric.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're gonna, as part of our explanation, point out the significant savings that people have enjoyed over the past 2 years.
and having spent $25,000 for replacing my septic system last year. I don't want to charge them too much, but I understand what cost is.
10,000 customers and a $200 million plant, it's a significant cost over time, absolutely.
Question on sewer users. Do we have does everybody pay for their sewer usage that uses the sewer? Is there anybody that's exempt?
No,
The city pays for
the
everything.
city pays, the utility pays.
We pay.
Yeah, you flush a toilet here, every year paying the bill.
Good, okay, thank you.
Based on water meters. A lot of communities do it based on square footage, on how many properties are served. We do it by water consumption, and we have the ability to also use a sewer meter if there's this industrial process that's not flushing it on the toilet.
The only exception to that would be according to state statute, the housing authority, but that's a state statute required exemption.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Laurel. All right. we've got some presentations also concerning money that has to get loaned from the electric division to the sewer division. So for that, we have Mike Andriana. Is that how you pronounce it?
Nailed it.
Really?
Yeah, right. So Mike is our bond counsel, but also bond counsel for the city. And he is the one who does all of our financing agreements with the state of Connecticut for drinking water and clean water fund projects. And so he'll go into the details, and this is a renewal of what we did last year, but he'll go into why we're doing it and how we have to make this happen.
I think you've all met me before, but I'm Mike Andriana, attorney at Pullman Conley. Yeah, I was here probably just about a year ago when we first started talking about this loan from the electric division to the sewer division. And at that point, it was because there were delays at the state level in getting our funding agreements in place. And we wanted work to start, and we needed to figure out a way to pay for that work before we could start getting money from the state. And that's why we entered into this kind of loan from the electric division to the sewer division, which allows the sewer division to borrow money. It pays the electric division a real interest rate, basically what they're earning on their money. And we put that in place last July 1, 2024. So at this point, we do have the funding in place with the state for the project. But what has turned out now and why we're kind of coming back to you and proposing a new kind of loan between the two divisions for the fiscal year 2025. And just as a side note, under state law, the only way we can do these that are permitted to do them is doing them as kind of 1 year lines of credit. We can't do multi-years under state law, so that's why I'm coming back to you again this year, is that we'd like to have the kind of line of credit in place more as a backup. But so now we're getting state funding when we get an invoice, and what will typically happen is NPU gets an invoice, make sure it's okay. For the most part, you know, they can use sewer division monies to pay that bill, depending on the size of it. But there's still a delay coming from the state. I would say it's, you know, a couple months at least. The other thing that this provides is if, as time evolves over fiscal year 2025 and we start incurring large monthly invoices, rather than taking all of that money from the sewer division, this allows the sewer division to basically borrow from the electric division for a very short term, use that to pay the bills, and then when the money comes in, they can repay the electric division. So you have in front of you, and later on in this meeting, you'll be asked to take some action, is basically a new loan from the electric division to the sewer division line of credit. It will be for fiscal year 2025. It will be for the same amount as was last year, $15.5 million. What will happen, there's an outstanding balance right now on the current line of credit, but that will be, as required by state law, paid down to zero for June 30th. So the note that's in place right now will be paid off, and we'll have a new note starting July 1st with a zero balance. And depending on the needs of the sewer division for the next year, that will be tappable.
When Larry gives the update later on the sewer plant, you can see the progress going down. If you had a chance to drive by or look at the amount of activity happening on Hollyhock Island, we are getting very substantial smoothness. And you know, we do a great job of getting the bills into the state as quickly as possible with certified payroll and all the requirements met. But it's still a challenge to get the money in.
Maybe contact the commissioner's office or have one.
Well, I think with what we have in place, we can more than cover. It's just we haven't had it go more than 2 months, have we now? But we're talking, you know, 5 million a month, or large numbers a month,
So I got a question about equity or fairness, whatever the phrase might be. Our electric customer base is different than our sewer customer base. There are people who are just electric customers and so forth. When the sewer division borrows money from the electric division, is there an interest rate?
Oh, yeah, it is, and maybe Steve can speak to this. Basically, we talked about this last year, we decided from a fairness point of view, that the sewer division effectively has to pay the electric division basically the same interest rate that they're earning having their money in the bank.
Okay.
So we actually tie the rate to what the electric division is earning in its bank account, so that there's none of that disparity.
That's in the resolution too.
What's that?
That's the resolution.
Yes, yes, that's right in it.
I didn't quite understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we do have some sewer customers, for instance, out of town customers who don't pay electric. But pretty much anybody who's a sewer, the vast majority of sewer users are electric.
Yeah, okay.
But the way it's done, it's completely separated.
I've been asked, you tell me if you wanted to say any word.
Well, I was gonna ask that next, if you could just maybe stay on and talk about the other two, funding ordinances.
Yeah, I'll talk about the water and sewer funding ordinances, skipping the PLAs for right now. And this gets back to kind of what you've been talking about exactly before is, so give you a little history here. So the MPU does a lot of borrowing and receives a lot of grants from the state through two separate programs. One they call their Clean Water Fund program, which is basically for sewer projects. And they also have a drinking water fund program for water projects. For each of these programs, MPU basically has a financing agreement set up with the state that allows them to borrow kind of multiple times over and over for different projects and have all that debt from the state's perspective kind of on parity, secured by either the water division or the sewer division revenues, depending on what the project is. In those financing agreements, the state has kind of two financial covenants. One covenant they have is what's called a debt service coverage test. So anytime MPU wants to borrow more money, they basically have to, MPU, and I work with Val and Laura on this, provide the certificate to the state that shows that for the next 5 years, using kind of projected revenues and operating expenses, that MPU, that division could cover 120% of the maximum annual debt service for MPU over those 5 years. Just to show that, look, our projections are that we're going to be able to repay. And we've done that. But obviously, particularly on the sewer, as this water treatment facility comes into play and we start bringing on more and more debt, that number is going to go up. So this is something we're focused on now. The other financial covenant that the state has, which is interesting because it has no reporting requirement, but is a covenant under the financing agreement that says each year NPU, both its water division and sewer division, will collect enough revenue, enough fees, enough charges, whatever it does, you know, as we're talking tonight about setting the rates, collect enough of that to pay all your operating expenses, pay, you know, for the test, it's, you have to show that you can pay 120% of your debt service. And then the other thing that's in the rate covenant test that these two resolutions talk about specifically is there's also this requirement that you have to have enough revenues to cover all of your capital expenditures that are not funded from the state's program. And the combination of those, you have to effectively meet each year. What we're starting to run into when looking at this is when we have to take into account kind of non-finance capital expenditures. And I think particularly, I think both water and sewer typically run between, I would say, 800,000 to 1.5 million a year. That's not financed kind of by the state. What these resolutions do is allow MPU to basically allocate cash reserves, either in the sewer division or the water division, for these kind of non-finance capital projects. So by allocating cash reserves, effectively almost kind of setting up a reserve account, then it doesn't have to be counted towards meeting the rate covenant test. And it provides MPU some relief and flexibility going forward in setting its rates and doing different things like that. So I don't think anyone's here is from the state, but what we're dealing with is basically kind of financing, accounting, maneuvering to give MPU the most flexibility as possible by setting up these reserves. Because otherwise, working with Val, we were starting to run into years where we would have a shortfall and we technically could not meet the covenant and could, in theory, be technically in default under this agreement. So we didn't want to do that. So that's why you're seeing these two resolutions, one for the water division, one for the sewer division that are in front of you that you're going to be asked to take action.
What kind of money are we talking as far as cash reserve is concerned?
I can tell them here, what were we thinking with water for this year?
So for FY 25 water, it's about 1.4 million. And for sewer, it's about 1.2 million. And it does fluctuate, but like Mike said, you know, on the high side, it's probably 1.5 million. It can drop, you know, to like, let's see, 772,000 is our lowest year. And we use these numbers, they're based on our 10-year capital plan. So it really, like Mike said, it gives us that leeway so that we don't fail in our rate coming test.
Yeah, what we're basically doing, it won't affect the revenues you collect or what the rates you're going to charge. It's basically, from our perspective, when making sure we're in compliance with the state's document, is saying we're just going to kind of technically allocate the payment of these non-finance capital expenditures from reserves rather than revenues. That way, we don't have to count any revenues towards these. It doesn't really affect cash flow at all. It's the same amount of money. It's kind of this theory that cash is fungible, whether it's operating revenues versus cash flow.
Okay, but the cash reserves are not included as part of the rate. So it's like money that's not, it's just not, it didn't have to be discussed when the rates are put together, you're saying.
Right, it shouldn't affect the rate setting at all.
So, okay.
Yeah, so it's just putting the money in reserves, so it covers the covenants that are on below.
Yeah.
So it's. Yeah, all right, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Andriano.
You're welcome.
Okay. Right. Also, strategic presentation, we have a project labor agreement discussion. Chris, would you like to speak?
That's going to be Attorney Robinson, also for Pullman Conley, to give the board an overview of what project labor agreements are and how they can potentially impact some of our projects.
Good evening, my name is Fred Robinson. Was told you I'm in Pullman Conley, I'm a construction litigator. Litigate cases that arise out of construction projects, not personal injury. And as a result of doing that for many years, I've gotten into construction contracting. And as a result of that, I've gotten into PLAs. First question, I guess, is what's a PLA? PLA stands for Project Labor Agreement. And as the name implies, it's really a collective bargaining agreement. just the way an employer and a union representing a bargaining unit of that employer's employees would have, and would negotiate and execute and live by for the period of the contract. But it's not simply a collective bargaining agreement. It's really an expression by the owning entity, the municipal entity, the quasi-municipal entity, that certain interests that the state recognizes statutorily are present, that the awarding authority, the owner of the construction project, you decide if these interests are present. If they're not, you don't have a PLA. If they are, you do have a PLA. That's a matter of statute. So, and the contract, and all you're doing is authorizing the PLA because you believe it's in the interest of the public to do so. Or you may not authorize a PLA because you don't think it's in the public interest to have it. And I'm going to talk about the actual public interest factors that you have to consider in deciding whether or not to have a PLA. But let's assume you decide to have a PLA. What you do is you put out in the bidding materials, we're going to have a PLA. And the PLA becomes a contract between the successful bidder or the general contractor, the construction management agreement, and the building trades council. Fundamentally, you take all the contracts for the various trades, or collective bargaining agreements for the various trades, and they become appended to and a part of the PLA. And even if one or more expires during its terms, the successor agreement becomes part of it. So what's in it for you guys? You can legitimately ask that question. Well, the original theory of the PLA, at least the express theory of the PLA, is that it buys labor peace under big projects. Now you may ask, well, we've had labor peace without PLAs for years. I don't remember the last time a construction union struck a construction contract. But nonetheless, that was the theory. But there are other benefits of PLA that have been identified. And in fact, there's a state statute that authorizes municipality government entity to to require a PLA for a given project on a project by project basis. You can't just say I'm going to have PLAs for all my projects. Got to do it on a project by project basis. And the things that PLA is supposed to do for you is to promote efficiency, provide cost and direct and indirect benefits to the public entity. Will help in making a skilled workforce available. In my experience, the idea of labor peace, the idea of, is this going to cost me more to have a PLA? Or is my project going to cost more to have a PLA than it would otherwise? So I didn't have a PLA. And there's a lot of debate about that. There's studies that show that it could be that the price of construction, price of the project, can be as much as 18% higher than it otherwise. There are studies that say, wow, no, I think it's only like 2% higher. And when you think about it, because you're dealing with municipalities. Whether you have a union contractor or a non-union contractor doing your project, the contractor has to abide by the prevailing wage. And the prevailing wage requirements are essentially the same as union scale for wages and benefits for various trades. But we did one in Manchester. And what was important in Manchester was local employment and local apprenticeship programs becoming available to local residents of the locality. Some of the other considerations will prevent or help to prevent construction delays. And if you have a collective bargaining agreement binds everybody, you're not going to have jurisdictional disputes. It's clearly going to be a strike clause because the statute says you got to have a no strike clause in there. That's how you get the piece. So there are a lot of things that cause construction delay. I know because I litigate construction delay cases all the time. But the wisdom is that a PLA will help avoid construction delays. That will help promote safety and quality construction. The workforce that we get with a PLA is generally well trained and very capable of journeymen. Also, another interest in promoting the advancement of minority and women-owned business. Probably provide that anyway. And it would have, as I said, a positive effect on employment opportunities in the community. So these are the kinds of things that you review, not the kinds of things, the things you might want to review other things too. But it's entirely up to you. It's your discretion whether or not to acquire a PLA. I have two studies for you. The statute establishes certain requirements for a PLA. It must set forth mutually binding procedures for resolving disputes, can be implemented without delay, has to include guarantees against a strike, lockout, strike clause, or concerted action into slowing or stopping the project. It must ensure a reliable source of skilled and experienced labor, and it must include goals. The number of apprenticeships, percentage of the work to be performed by minorities. And this is not just for union contractors. It's not as if you decide to have a PLA, the Building Trades Council, which is an amalgamation of unions, is going to be involved. The statute makes it very clear that all contractors are invited to whatever project without regard to whether they're unionized or not. And you must select the lowest responsible qualified bidder without regard to whether that bidder is unionized or not. PLA is binding all contractors and subcontractors in terms of the agreement. Any bidder who doesn't agree to abide by the terms of the PLA or require him to negotiate a PLA shall not be regarded as a responsible qualified bidder for the project. That's really it. I mean, obviously there's controversy. There are those who think that it's going to cost more There's studies that say it does. There's studies that say the difference is infinitesimal or it's relatively small. There are, but you have to decide these things for yourself. Do the benefits outweigh the theoretical detriments? Is it important to us? And do I think, and if it is, do I think a PLA will help increase employment in the locality? I had made this presentation to the city council. Had to wait around for public comment. They had public comment. There were 400 union people who came up one after another and said how great it was. But you know, what was interesting about what they said is that they're union guys, but they don't have work in the local area. So they have to drive to Norwalk or Westport or Stamford to work. And they don't really get paid for that. So it's costing them money to go to get the paycheck. When to get that paycheck, they have to drive to Stanford to So again, that's something you can consider. If you're interested, I can give you a checklist of things you have to do to decide whether or not to have a PLA. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Do you have any idea what increase to be? This is for the solely for the sewer project?
No, this is for potential other projects in the council. It would be the Wasser Bridge and the two mixing projects to the water tanks. So we're not looking for a vote or any action this month from the board. We'll further this discussion at the next meeting. But this is an opportunity to ask Rick any questions about PLAs and get the board an understanding of what they are. This is not something that utility has done on any of the projects that I've been involved.
I would appreciate the checklist.
You got it.
Thank you.
I'll send it to Chris.
Thank you.
One of the things you should
So
consider.
it's not a standardized PLA. It's up to the organization to decide which piece parts they want to put in it. Is that the way it works? So you said if I use a PLA for a project, is there a boilerplate PLA that lays out all the requirements? Can you, like, in other words, you say that it would involve union trade or minority businesses or women-owned businesses. Is that like a choice that you can have within the PLA, or is that?
Yeah.
Are they all?
Well, but while the owner, the municipal owner, is not a party to the contract, it's a contract between the employer and the employees. The owner can establish certain requirements that the PLA has to have. The statute establishes certain requirements. But you can have a quota for local employment, for apprenticeships, define local any way you want. There are a number of things you can do to have the PLA to which you are not a party. You can't sue to enforce it. There are a number of things you can do to make sure that PLA promotes the interests that you had and have that caused you to want a PLA, take advantage of the PLA device. So it's some people talk about the size of the project. It's better on a bigger project than a smaller project. On a smaller project, there's more stuff that you have to deal with. On a bigger project, do the same stuff, but the project is bigger.
Those are relatively small projects.
So relatively small projects, yes.
We're not a party to this contract,
Right.
but we're designing the contract.
Well, you're not really, you're insisting on certain provisions there. statute requires that certain conditions be there, otherwise it looks like a requirement. You don't set the wages, you're not negotiating anybody's wages, hours, and conditions. Doing it, I know
Well, if it's
benefits,
the same thing as a union contract, why should we go to all the trouble of doing it?
so again,
If it's basically the same requirements between the employer and the employees as a union contract, it's prevailing wage, as you said, why do we need to get involved?
The request,
Well, it's up to you whether you want to get it.
I don't know.
Mike, it was requested by the city council, so that's why we're educating the board.
And it's requested by city council?
Yes. So that's what it for PLA, yes. So when we look at what these projects we're doing, they're drinking water and clean water fund projects. Those projects by the state requirements have Bacon Davis wages, which are union scale wages. They have a requirement already for WBE, I think it's 6%, is it now?
5, 3.
Wow, okay, 5 and 3, okay, women-based and minority-based. So there are some requirements that whether we have a union shop or non-union shop doing the projects, they still have to meet those requirements. The last big projects we've done, if we look at the treatment at Deep River, the treatment at Stony Brook, those are done by RH White. They're awarded to non-union shop that paid union wages and met all the requirements. The sewer plant is one that's by Nickerson. Nickerson is a union shop, and they have United operating engineers, and they have the Teamsters working on that project. So
Does this give us the flexibility?
they add the Teamsters as part of their internal arrangements, yes.
Does this give us like flexibility where we might not otherwise be able to use the non-union job because we don't have this in place?
That's a good question for Rick.
Do you have a question, sir?
I heard it, but I'm not sure I understand it. Could you
I'm
repeat
not
it?
either. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why we want to consider this, and there could be good reasons, I just don't know what they are. But it seems to me that we're trying to lay out a blueprint where it's easier to have a choice between a non-union shop and a union shop for a particular job. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but that seems to be what the advantage might want. Why does the city want us to get into this?
Well, just to use real companies as an example, you could have Nickerson bid on these jobs, you could have RH White bid on the job. Each would have to abide by the same labor agreement if there's a PLA. Even though RH White is not union, even though Nickerson is union. By the way, you have access to one of the things you have access to the hiring law. So that's an important consideration. But as I said before, there are a number of factors you can look at. Some of them are more theoretical than real. Labor peace, you're going to get labor peace with or without it. I don't think it promotes or retards construction delay. But I do think that if done properly, you can in an appropriate project, you can increase employment opportunities for both union and non-union workers, for the residents or your constituents who would benefit because there's a PLA. That might be fantastic. I get those same people anyway.
Is there any data suggesting how many union workers there are involved that will benefit from something like this?
So if we look at the two types of projects, one is the water mixing system. It was done by a relatively small electrical contractor who did the last one at the Alpha not a large workforce for that.
Is that UCI?
What was the name of that one? Do you guys remember? Mary Lou, you worked with the integrators on that.
Yes. Delray.
Delray. So that's the kind of contractor we're expecting to take on those projects. When you look at the other one, which is basically rebuilding a small utility bridge, that's more, could be an iron worker type job, but it also could be somebody as small as like a Mel Weese. So it could, that, once again, not a really large utility construction projects for these three.
The painting job is probably not that big either.
That one's already been approved. So the three projects, one is new, which is the Bosra Bridge. And the other two are amended ordinances and resolutions because we had to up the funding on those because of the cost increases that have happened because of inflation. And those are the basic projects.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, if you don't mind. You want to pause some?
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, yes. Would you like to speak?
question was asked, well, why does the city
Yes.
want to do it?
Go ahead, Chris.
If you permit, I would like.
Yes, please do, please do.
So, my name is Joe Lucia, I'm the president pro tem of the city council. Thank you all for allowing me to address this one issue. To answer some of the questions regarding the PLA, we put in force a PLA for $385 million school project. And what Rick said was exactly right, he's an expert. But what he didn't mention were the things that we on the council that are supporting the PLA are looking for, and that is percentage of local hires, job training, apprenticeships for our local high school kids coming out of the tech schools and out of NFA, and really the high schools in the region. Job, I said job training. Right? These are the things that can be outlined in a PLA that are nowhere in a collective bargaining agreement. And as I understand the mechanism, if you decide to go down this road, which I strongly encourage, right, you would essentially be authorizing prison staff to work with bond counsel and to come up with an agreement, negotiated agreement with the Building Trades Council as to what those elements in the PLA are, setting those expectations. And the reason for it is quite simple. We have all heard the folks in this community bemoan the fact that Norwich is a distressed city. And I don't know that we'll ever not be a distressed city. But this is one thing. PLAs are one thing that we can do to help ease some of that distress by putting people to work, giving them the job training they need, and putting them to work in prevailing wage jobs. Now, I'll give you the counter, right? I'll give you the other side concrete example. The sewer treatment plant, $200 million project, no PLA. The Nickerson, as I understand it, is a union shop. I heard about that. Yes, thank you for verifying that. Okay, so all of the building trade unions are in there. Even if there were non-union contractors in there, as you heard, they'd have to pay prevailing wages. They'd have to give all the fringe benefits that are negotiated by the unions, because that's state statute. What this community is not getting out of the sewer treatment plant project is the job training and the guaranteed apprenticeships and the local contractors and the local residents being hired. So all of those, and I hate to use this phrase, but all of these trickle down things that are in a PLA are nowhere to be found because they are not negotiated in collective bargaining. So the city loses out. So in other words, a positive way to look at it is a PLA is a way for the community to get two bites at the apple. The first bite is bonding money, borrowing money, or finding money to to do these projects to improve our infrastructure. That's a win to the city over the long term. But the second bite of the apple is putting local people to work. Getting people into jobs where they're going to earn the kind of money that raises their standard of living. For some of them, that breaks the cycle of poverty that has gone on maybe in their families, maybe for generations. You all know me, you know that I've been a teacher a very long time. Most of you know that I'm with the tech schools. That is our mission, is to give kids the skills to get out there and earn these living wage jobs with benefits and advancement and continuing education and a future. And a PLA does that for the folks who are already beyond high school.
So, Joe, what would a clause in the PLA say that would make this happen? How would it be worded, just generally? Would it say like 20%?
Yes.
That would be.
Would say, yeah, and what is good about it is that there is flexibility. And when I say flexibility, it says that best effort will be made to achieve a 20% ratio of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so again, it's not saying, all right, your project doesn't move forward until you can find 25% minority contractors, right? It's a goal. Thank you for the word. It's a goal. You set these goals without it written down and documented and set and, in writing, it doesn't happen. And so, and I'm not dinging the sewer treatment plant project, all right? I'm saying it is a concrete example of exactly what we're talking about, okay? I met with the Nickerson people just in another part of my life, and they appear to be a great company. They take care of their people, they take care of their subs, positive to all across the board from everybody I've spoken to. And I asked a lot of questions because it's $200 million. Let's not hit ourselves, right? Okay, so a good company, okay? But their workforce isn't really from around here predominantly. It's not even coming from this region. It's many, not, I won't even say most, but many of their contractors and their workforce are coming. They're making that long ride from Norwalk, from Warwick, from near Worcester, Mass, and so on and so forth. They're driving down here while we have workers who are driving to Torrington and to Norwalk and to other cities working on prevailing wage jobs elsewhere where they could be working either.
You really mean, coordinate that so that they're working closest to the job and send them.
Well, that's one of the benefits when you say, when you're looking for local, when you're looking for resident hires, yeah. So you're shortening their drive time and their expense of getting to and from work every day.
It's a big project, but I would like to know how many people working for Nickerson from Norwich. If that's possible, to get that information.
Can I ask right now?
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
You have to have a PLA in place before the bids are accepted. I mean, can you put a PLA on the job after it's been?
We had this significant conversation. I'll let Mike chat on that or Rick chat on that, but there's no other questions for me. I'll sit back down.
Same thing, have a gray BMW. Yeah, you're blocking the gate to the store, place next door. Maybe we'll wrap this up, make sure there's no other questions, and then maybe you can move it after that. Are there any other questions for Joe or Rick while we got them here?
Question was, I just had that one last quick question. Can you put a PLA in place after you accepted a bid for a contract, or does it have to come before?
Statute is silent on that, but it's implication from the statute is that they're decided before you put the project out to bid, because the bid documents, so I say, it's going to be, I would think so, but I think so.
Likely be a change order for anything after or over contract is the one. Sure.
Yeah, the change order for what? I mean,
Yeah, well, you change requirements to the bid. I'm sure there'd be some dollar.
yeah, you don't want to change the plan. You don't want to make playing field either.
I'll just say we were advised on the school building project that if there's gonna be a PLA, that should be known before big packages go up.
So is there one for the school? One last question, Joe, there is, and how much more of an increase was there?
Also, we heard, sorry, we heard, we had a lot of numbers thrown at us. We heard 2%, we heard 12%, we heard somewhere between 8 and 10%, but what we're hearing back in the building from the owner's rep and on the building committee is that's really more about escalation and inflation in construction costs than it is about really the PLA per se. So it's very hard to quantify. The PLA is going to have this X percent impact because every market is constantly changing. And the construction market right now, Rick said it, it's settling down. Iowa was 8 to 10% per year, just straight up escalation. So it really is kind of hard to say.
The reason we had to go out and review these ordinances and resolutions is because of this inflation that is continuing on. And it's one of those things where we can't go out and bid without a PLA and simultaneously bid with a PLA. Nobody's going to put in 2 bid packages for something like this to get it apples to apples. It's going to be rather subjective what the impact is.
So, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. So if it's not apples to apples, it's gonna be different prices. In other words, you're not gonna get local training and this and that and everything for nothing. Right, it's gonna add to the cost of the project. Against a bid that doesn't include a PLA.
Yeah,
I mean, it's extra things.
I'm not the person to really ask that. I can only report back on what we've been told on the building committee is that, yes, we see some escalation in costs because of those things. But as policymakers, we have to balance that against the benefits of the community. So,
And I think you heard.
I won't say yes or no, because I
It's
don't
not
know.
a free benefit, the second bite cost.
And I think Rick said anywhere between 2 and 18%. That's what he has seen.
So fair enough, yes.
So fair point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against it, I don't know enough.
No, I understand that. No, it's a fair question, completely fair.
And there's no experience in this building, utilizing PLA, positives or negative, impacts on that. We don't have that internal, and that's why we brought, Rick and Mike here to have a high level discussion on this.
Yeah, I noticed that, in Hartford, they use a lot of PLAs, to help with a lot of minority contractors, and to keep a lot of the jobs, but also to keep things in a timely fashion by putting in due dates when things should be done, because it helps with the cost and keep the cost down. So I think that the PLAs are a good asset for us to use from what I've seen in Hartford. And there was a couple projects that didn't use PLAs in the Hartford area, and they ended up costing the city additional money and almost bankrupting the city, actually. So I think this will be a good idea for us to use in some of the projects that we have coming up, though.
So maybe when Mike like Rick gets back, we could ask him his experience on that, because all of our contracts have dates and requirements, and you go after liquidated damages for delays, but it's extremely hard to collect on liquidated damages. And I don't know if a PLA is more or less effective than what the contract language we put in. And maybe you can cover that, Mike, but we'll definitely ask Rick when he gets back.
Yeah, I mean, the thing we gotta keep in mind, and so when you're talking about liquidated damages, that would be between NPU and the contractor. These PLAs, the agreement is really between your construction manager and the trades council. So it's kind of, again, hate to use it, but apples and oranges here we're looking at. Yeah, I think historically, and I don't know, you might know, I don't know if PLA would change the ability of the owner, say NPU.
Our experience on construction contracts, it's not usually a lack of labor that causes delays. It's other complicated issues such as delays in materials or something is done and it's not done quite correctly, and the arguing back and forth on how to resolve things that were not necessarily done to the contracts and specifications. Or change orders that happen because of some condition found in the middle of a project.
Let me just add one more thing. Keep in mind that the policymakers in Washington DC and Hartford and here on the other side of town, but have embraced the idea and the concepts of, and the benefits of PLA. That's why it was such an important factor in the raise grant application for OIC. It is an item on the rubric for scoring any other grant applications, any other kinds of funding that is not coming strictly from bonding. The question is always there. Does the X intend to implement a PLA?
When it comes to awarding clean water and drinking water funds, that is not taken into account at all on those specific projects. But I will say, when we were looking at some of the grant applications, they did ask for strong labor agreements and cooperation, but not on these types of projects. But the Clean Water, Drinking Water Fund allows them to be used. That was, when did that go into effect, Mike? Do you remember? There was a memo that came out, maybe in 18 or something of the.
I was gonna say maybe 10 years ago. I don't know the exact date.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to wait for Rick or do you want to move on to the motions?
The motions don't have any impact on this, so we're going to resume the discussion when Rick gets back.
Right.
Okay, so we can move on, yes.
All right. Okay, based on what we heard tonight, we've got 3 resolutions, I believe, based on authorization of the loan and authorization of cash reserves for the water and sewer. So to start with the first, I will entertain a motion concerning the resolution authorizing the loan from the electric division to the sewer division. As discussed this evening.
Make that motion.
One second.
Thank you, Michael. I have a first and a second. Is there any discussion on the resolution as described? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
I'm so over here. Thank you. This one, I guess.
All those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. All right, the second motion to discuss this evening or to vote on this evening concern the resolution on the designation of the water division cash reserve to fund the cost of non-funded capital expenditures. I will entertain a motion to approve that. If you'd like to. All right, Bob and Bill, seconds. All right, is there any discussion on the resolution as described? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. And lastly, it's the same type of resolution only for the sewer division. So resolution authorizing the designation of sewer division cash reserves to fund cost of non-funded capital expenditures. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to.
All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sean. A first and a second. Is there any discussion on the resolution as described? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, motion carries. So all 3 motions carry unanimously, I believe. And you can move on to the operations, or we can.
Oh, Rick is back. Okay, Rick. While you were going, the question came up as to the potential delays in will PLA shorten those delays in contracts and limit our exposure to long overruns of the project. And I explained that we have the ability in our contracts with the general contractor to have liquidated damages for delays in the project, but it's always complicated very hard to collect on those. What's your experience with the PLA regarding, pilot runs on projects?
Construction delay. Construction delay occurs for any number of contractor cost delay, failure to manage job, failures to do or effective work, a variety of other things. Most of the contracts that I do are owners, and I just try to protect against owner cost delay. There's no damage to the delay clause, but it's the PL is not going to affect. They're going to influence the progress of the work.
Okay. All right, was there any additional discussion concerning the PLA of Mr. Robinson or Alderman DeLucia? All right, well, thank you, Alderman.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Rick Robinson. Thanks. All right, well, that brings us to agenda item 9, which is operations. So here we have updates on various things. We'll start off with Eric McDermott and the update on the electric substation repairs.
Your slides, or you can.
If you don't mind driving down,
I will.
I'm gonna point something out.
Yeah.
Evening, everyone. I want to spend a few minutes tonight just taking us through some of the substation repairs that we've taken on over the last 6 months or so. For the first slide, I want to start by bringing us back to December, as most everyone probably remembers. In December, we had a fairly large failure at our 10th Street substation. It was the bus number 2 tiebreaker. Ultimately, taking 10th Street substation offline and negatively impacting over 10,000 customers. Where that failure occurred was actually right here. This is breaker 621. This is actually the tie between our transmission line and all of the distribution that go out to our customers. So when we experienced this failure, we actually severed, and all of our customers taking the substation offline. You can take me to the next slide, please. What happened was we were experiencing very significant rain during that time, and we actually had rainwater enter into the breaker cabinet through a failed bushing seal. You can actually see 2 of our substation technicians, Matt and Dylan, inspecting the bushings on top of the breakers right here. This is actually our bus number 2 right here. And these are actually the bushings that sit on top of that breaker. Those bushings create the connection between the transformer, which you can't see, it's off to the right here, and the bus. Now, when we introduced rainwater into high voltage, you can probably imagine what we ended up with was a pretty catastrophic fireball within that cabinet. That fireball created the damage that you see over here. So if you'll notice, we have some pretty significant discoloration on these 3 bus bars. These 3 bus bars are actually the connection that goes from the bushings back into the back of the breaker cabinet that then feeds the rest of the bus. We also have significant charring beneath those 3 bushings. Pretty catastrophic damage altogether. This actually blew, these are protective plates that go around the bus. It actually blew one of them clear off. It was lying when the team opened up the back of the cabinet. That plate was actually lying on the ground there. Next slide, please. So from there, our MPU team and one of our vendors, Circuit Breaker Sales, embarked on restoring the breaker cabinet. They replaced all the bushings, the bus bar. They refurbished the entire cabinet, sanding it all the way down to bare metal, repainting it, recoating it, and adding and replacing all of the waterproof seals that go around it. This is them performing the work over here. Because we were in a hurry to get our 10th Street substation back online, we prepared ourselves to work in all kinds of weather. So you can see where they set up a whole bunch of tarps to make sure that even in rain, because you remember we had a lot of rain happening this time of year, they worked through it all. Over here is what the back of a breaker cabinet should look like. You can see where we replaced the 3 bushings. You can see the nice shiny brand new copper up top. All new bus bar coming down the bottom, no discoloration, brand new breaker, all freshly painted. What that allowed us to do is bring 10th Street substation back online on March 13th.
Just for the board, just to clarify, like you say, okay, all 10,000 customers weren't out for the entire time to repair the substation. What we did, and Eric and the electric team did a great job of essentially switching around this, which is a fancy way. Our circuits are interconnected and we were able to feed it temporarily from our other substations. So that removes a little bit of our redundancy, which is okay on a temporary basis, especially at that time of year. But we were able to get customers restored within a couple of hours, and this took a couple of weeks to do the actual repair itself.
Yeah, so when you have a failure like this and somebody's electronics are damaged on the side of the 10,000 people that will be liable for damage to
So we do receive throughout the year on however many outages we have, we do receive damage claims for damaged equipment and things like that. Typically, if it's nature caused, that we are not liable. If it's a failure of our equipment or something that our personnel did, then we would be liable, but those cases are few and far between. In most cases, our outages are nature caused.
Issues to file a damage claim. It goes through our operations team for review, and then it goes to Val and Laura for the final review to make the insurance adjusters. On these here, which are acts of nature, it's go to your homeowner's insurance. Taken care of.
If we ultimately, hopefully sooner than later, upgrade to 34.5 systems, substations, will that mitigate against this problem? Will it be easier to take one station offline and have the others?
You're stealing my thunder, Bob. So yeah, absolutely. But absolutely, to answer your question, yes, building that 34.5 line, that ring around the city is going to significantly increase the redundancy on our substation by allowing us to more easily back up the substation one to the other. As Jeff explained, we did about a 2-hour switching operation to bring our customers back online when this failed. The vision that we have on our 34.5 line, that would probably be seconds because it will be automated. Next slide, please. All right, so unfortunately, only a month later, we experienced a failure at the Dudley substation. This one was caused by a rodent who is not a very large rodent, who was able to sneak into our bus and actually spread itself across all 3 phases in the back of one of our breakers, circuit 515. That ended up taking out the substation because the way, even though breaker 515 here is not a bus tie breaker like we have at 10th Street, it did create a failure in the bus itself. The good news here is Dudley substation is split between bus 2 and bus 1. Half of Dudley substation when this happened. But we did have to take bus 1 offline. Next slide, please. So what happened here was that rodent was able to get itself somehow across the back of this breaker. What you see is each one of these terminals here is one of the 3 phases that we have going across that terminal. You can see the arc that it created. You can see the heavy heat damage around this breaker here. This is actually the breaker that slides into that terminal. And you can see the back of the breaker where this breaker here was actually total loss. So what that resulted in is it damaged the racking mechanism. We actually had a hard time getting this breaker out when the damage occurred and completely destroyed that breaker. Next slide, please. So we went to work again. NPU and circuit breaker sales ended up refurbishing the entire cabinet. So you can see where we replaced pretty much everything inside here, from the racking mechanism on the bottom. This is the protective plate. You can't actually see the slots where the breaker actually slides in because that's protected by this plate here. And then all of the control wiring that you see in here, all of that had to be replaced through this. We also purchased a refurbished breaker. We're about 2 weeks out on that now. Once that breaker comes in, we'll be able to plug that breaker in here and restore circuit 515. But in the meantime, all of the bus work in the cabinet itself is complete. So that allowed us to bring the bus 1 at Dudley back online. We restored that last Friday.
How does a rodent get into the box?
So unfortunately, we had, all of our equipment here at Dudley Substation was installed about the 1950s. So we have in certain areas a pretty significant amount of corrosion, and the rodent was actually able to break his way through the metal and find his way into the back of that breaker cabinet. We have since plugged that all up with new steel plating, so we don't foresee any large rodents getting in there in the near future. But
But there's also, bait they put in to protect it, but that doesn't mean that they can't, they can get in the smallest of holes.
unfortunately, and Dudley Street in particular is got woods all around it. So rodents and all kinds of vermin are a pretty regular occurrence here. We do have a contract with thank you, with an extermination company that sets traps and bait and all that kind of stuff. They come once a month, but it is hard to keep up with.
Was there anything left of the road after that happened?
I spared you guys the photo, but we do have one. And no, there wasn't a lot left. 13,000 volts across the rodent and,
But it kind of enlarged, it looked like a possum.
Yeah.
It's more than a rat.
it did look more than a rat, yeah.
So the grommet that failed, did that prompt a survey of all the grommets of all the substations?
So, next slide, please. So we have a couple of actions going forward. So first, we're going to receive and install that refurbished breaker out at Dudley Street. Our expectation is to get that done sometime in the next 2 weeks. Next, we have planned inspections out at Penn Street, both at bus 1 and bus 2, because we were able at the time of the failure to do an inspection of bus 2, but in the midst of the storm with rain coming down, we're not entirely. So we are going to take 10th Street Substation offline again and get back there and do a full inspection of both bus 1 and bus 2. And then obviously we'll rectify any issues that we find at that time. Again, these buses, bus 1 at 10th Street was installed in about the 1960s and bus 2 was installed in about the 1990s. So again, we're dealing with some pretty old infrastructure. Next thing is implementing our 10-year capital plan. So as part of that capital plan, as Bob alluded to, we are installing a 34.5 ring that will interconnect all 3 of our substations. So if we do have a failure of any one of our substations, the other 2 will immediately be able to back that substation up. We are also, within that 10-year capital plan, we have significant plans to upgrade or replace that aging infrastructure I just talked about. As part of that 34.5 project, we'll be replacing a lot of the infrastructure around our substations. And we will also be working out on our transmission lines and everything like that.
Where is the capital situation there? I mean, are there grants available? Are we going to do it internally?
Yeah, so there's been no grants that we, the grants have been overly competitive. When they're awarding, carving out 3 municipal projects on the grants that we applied for over the country, and there's over 2,000 municipal entities who are vying for those projects. So it's really the lottery to win one of these things for this. What we're doing is we're proceeding forward with our bond rating, and we are putting aside money to get this going. Right now, we have the design already started on a 34.5, and it's just about complete for the conceptual design. Then we're going to go and start getting the money to get this thing moving forward. These projects not only help aging infrastructure, but we're also looking at the impacts to electrification. So we're talking about adding in load capabilities for distributed generation, batteries and whatnot across the entire, our entire grid, but also able to increase loads for electric vehicles and for the combined heat units, that electrification that's coming. We're slow adopters in Norwich, but we know it's coming. We'll just be a little lagging behind the rest of the country, and Connecticut is lagging a good part of the country as well. When we look at 1% of owners of the electric vehicles in Norwich, 6% in Connecticut, and you go to California and it's probably every other car. So it's, you know, we are gonna get there. It's just gonna take a little while. And these projects all work with that increased reliability and redundancy.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right, now Larry's up with his favorite project discussion, wastewater. Here we go. Here we go. All right.
View looking, yeah, that is looking, no, I'm sorry, it's looking south, and I was gonna say that, lost direction. What you see is the existing aeration chambers. This huge excavation is for the new clarification, secondary settling tanks 3 and 4. As big as there's one big one out there, would be actually 4 of these. Those piles are about 50, 60 feet deep. They're installing, you can actually go to the next slide, maybe. They're installing a way to fortify that excavation because they have to take that dirt down another 20 feet to start driving the piles down, big pile machine. And there's probably 70 piles in that general area to 2 circular enclosures down to about 90 feet. And it is all, actually go back one. This is where most of the garbage is. They've reburied most of it. Plastics there and glass than actually dirt. It's kind of fascinating historical water if you go through there. And Larry, you said you have to take all the metal out and all the tires out. Tires have to get, as part of the contract, metal in the cars, they found that kind of thing, but all the plastics, the broken beer cans, all that stuff is getting remixed with dirt and but it's truly inactive, it was an active landfill for quite a long time.
Where's the road coming into the facility?
Road coming into the facility is, this is that main road. This is kind of a drone picture that Jeremiah took. And so the next slide just kind of shows you, I mean, that's they're starting to remove that soil now for the next step. And I think the next slide actually shows a better picture of the next step. So this is where the new sludge handling building. This is looking towards the west branch of the Antic. And this is their pile driving machine. Again, it's a massive auger that drills straight down. They pump grout into it and pull that and grout back out and take a steel rebar cage and jam it down into the piles. They let it sit. They have to do a pull test on the piles to make sure they don't come out. So, but the next picture, you get a better picture of the height of this machine. It's pretty big. and they're doing several piles a day. It's not a slow process, but it's not that quick either. But they're definitely making progress, and there's probably over 200 piles of this nature on site. They'll be driving piles for that. Oh my God, don't touch. That's right. That's the 4th main from that combined Rose Alley on the west side. The big all new piles are holding the 4th main. So
It's like the dome must be, what, 20 feet high?
well, it's higher than 20. This one's that's almost like 90 feet tall. That
Wow.
You can see the size of the water. You can see that almost a round spiral piece of build.
But it's not much dome, about 4 stories, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, it's hard to get the scale, but it's huge. You can see that thing from a long way in Norwich. So that's a big part of what they're doing now. So it doesn't look like a lot going on, but there's definitely a lot going on the ground.
The piles have to go down to bedrock,
Yes, they're doing.
so it's 90 feet to bedrock.
It's like 70, 90 feet, depending. Yeah.
If you just go a little bit north, then you got outcropping again.
Yeah, they said that riverbed, like I said, when they hit the real soils, it's very, very sandy soils and easy to dig unless there's garbage.
Car.
The next picture. This one's actually kind of, this one's one of the latest pictures. There's 3 sets of aeration basins. The outside of these units are being kept in place. They're removing the inner walls. As of now, the process is the nitrification process is kind of a long, really slow process. It's going to be more flow this way over a series of, did I touch that again? No, over a series of baffles. So the flow will be going this way. So they're removing the interior walls. Like these tanks leak into these tanks. They have to seal all of these walls at the same time. So the next picture is, so it's right now it's just major demolition. This tank has been completely isolated, nothing getting into except for rainwater at this point in time. And all these old interior walls are all coming out to redo the new process under that convention. And I think the next slide is kind of just another overall general picture of just how different everything looks out there. Admin buildings, small delay taking that down with the fiber network issue. But you can see there's clarifier 2, that size will be here, 2 over here as well. These original clarifiers are all going away. The rest of the island is just a big construction site.
So what are you doing with that tank you were showing when you take the interior walls out? What process is not being done there? Where is it?
We're just using this side. Our flows are, it's been over 30 years since we've used both of those concurrently.
I see, okay.
Yeah, it's more like in heavy storms, when this actually serves as more of an overflow tank. More so, it's not, we would have to be flowing 8.5 continuously dry weather to be able to truly utilize
So
it.
they're gonna put the new baffle system in this side, and then they're gonna refurbish it, do the same thing on the other side.
Absolutely, yeah, running for you, yes.
And everything is being flood-proof?
Absolutely, yes.
Has the Holly Hot ever flooded in your time?
We weren't able to access the island, on a few of the storms.
Oh, really?
So when you look down by the transportation center, as recently as the last flood, that was about 4 feet of water right at the entrance of the transportation center.
It's really coming up, believe it or not, from the.
From the.
Yeah, it's coming up through the drainage system, the catch basin.
Yeah. Well, what we have abandoned, the island a couple of times when we were concerned about it, but it's never gone up to that level, but, we've got to do, we were originally asked to do 500 year flood, and now we have to do at least, 100 year plus what?
No, we had to redesign the 500 year. We had 100 year with 2 feet of freeboard. And then they changed the regulations.
But non-critical things can be less than 5 years. Critical things are 5.
Yes, I mean, it's critical things, so the electric stuff, yes, they all changed all the hurricanes, the FEMA, they like the insurance money went to pay, so they keep changing the regulations.
And it's better for us, but it's added cost in many years of redesign, unfortunately. If we would have done this 150 at most, not a $200 million project.
All right, thank you, Larry. We're gonna talk about the, Route 82 Bowser. Also what?
Yeah, so, on the Route 82, Larry can give the details of that, but we are basically on hold waiting for, the selectmen of Bosra to authorize going forward, and Larry, you want to talk about some of the
Yeah,
details?
they came to us a couple of years ago with all the issues with transient wells and all that stuff. They were looking at multiple funding solutions. They asked us to look at the DPH as one of them. They're trying to nail us down with the funding percentage, which we can't get unless we do a final funding application. We're not going to do a final funding application unless there's an agreement with Bosra to reimburse us for our costs. They're also looking at DEC funding like they did on Route 32 and all that stuff. What we can say is the plans, they're engineered, fully designed, fully approved by us, full cost estimates. That's what we submitted up to the state for funding. So it's a real cost. So the design's done. The only hurdle is Bosra committing to NPU and how to pay back, or if they're going to go through that of using the DPH. I emailed them the next steps in February. Val followed up in March with, I think, working with Mike, an even more detailed set of steps, and we never hear back what their plan is. And I think Chris and Steve have just recently reached out to their first person.
Yeah. So what we've asked is for their town attorney to reach out to Mike and go through every detail required. If they decide to go with us, the likelihood is they'll get a 30% grant on the water side. They may do better for longer periods of time with agriculture or these, other funding sources. So we're not forcing that, but we also can't have the state go to the next steps without a committee.
Or because we are solving some environmental issues out here, we can't answer that question.
That's only for the water, not sewer, right?
Just pure water.
And they were looking for Senator Austin to help on the sewer side, and she is committed to giving more funding, whether it's just, when it happens, to her schedule.
Call a business owner on 82, wonder what the status was. So if you could, maybe every other meeting, or if something comes up, at least give an update. That would be good.
And, you know, we had given them the good news last fall that they were approved. And we're, you know, we're still trying to get them to commit, but small towns and committing to a large project with some unknowns is tough.
And you got to work out. You selected.
His words lost the election because.
And the news like is terrifying.
What's the price tag on the Bosworth water lines?
I wouldn't be asking for
It's about 3 million.
3 million, I would say it was like 1 point, closer to 2 than the engineering side and stuff and contingency. It was under 2.
Yeah, sewer will be more because it's relatively flat. How many pump stations have you in there already? There's a few, right?
At least 1. And this is, we actually resized the water main water quality water. So we trimmed the main down to still serve all properties. So 8 inch, 4 feet deep. Some of it all safe, it's not expensive.
Did they do a cost benefit analysis to see if it would be cost effective to run a water line at 3 million? That seems like a lot considering.
That was up, it was like 1.7, 1.8. I mean, but it's significant.
Well, let me clarify. What we put in for funding, we anticipate the highest level of cost, which would include closing costs, all anticipated costs. So that doesn't necessarily mean that once the project goes out to bid, that it would say cost $3 million. So we won't really know actually until it goes out to bid.
But that includes legal, construction oversight, all of the other things that go along with a project like
20% contingency.
So Bosworth would have to agree not just on the construction costs, but all those additional costs as well. That's why we need to agree before we move forward.
If they go the other route, USDA or others, they will own the pipe and we will operate it at the end of their loan. If we go clean water, we have to own the pipe and they will have to agree to pay for the entire project up front. But just, there's no overhead, there's no extra that we charge them. The actual cost of the project.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Chris. All right, there's no other additional discussions and operations that will bring us to executive session. Chris, hold on. I got a question.
We have 4 highlights of the effectiveness of a PLA. And the first one says ensures timely completion of projects at or under budget. And you said that PLAs have no effect on those particular things for a project. I'm just curious as to what, I'm not trying to challenge you or anything. I'm just curious because someone said it to me for PLAs. So I just want to get a little bit of insight from you so I can understand.
I know that websites.
Okay.
Proponents of PLAs identify.
Okay.
The avoidance of construction as a benefit of PLAs.
Okay.
So if you think about it, you think about what causes delay on the project. And I guess it's true that we have inferior workers. They're going to create requirements that are going to work more slowly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But hire experienced contractors to manage the project. So most of the delay claims that arise for cost delay, force majeure delays, contractor cost delays are not a function of whether there's a PLA or not. So what projects do you mean by it? Delays can happen, delays happen in a whole variety of reasons. And a PLA basically says that you've got to have contractors who need to abide by the PLA. Who might have a job. And you know, by the wages, hours, these two employment within the respective collective bargaining agreements for partial. It just doesn't relate to the kinds of factors that create time problems.
Okay. All right.
You have some people who think PLAs are the greatest things in sliced bread. You have some people who think, the devil.
All right, thank you, Mr. Robinson. All right, thank you, Sean. If there's no other questions, that will bring us to executive session. Chris, who would you like to stay behind?
Steve, Jeff, and Chris Riley, and if we can have Rick and Mike stay as well.
And entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Robert. First and a second, is there any discussion about going into executive session?
So you can stay as well, right? And Mike's told to stay as well, so sure, do the record producing.
Thank you. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye, all those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, we're in executive session. And I'll get the recording turned off, and I will, well, actually, before we turn the recording, I state for the public record to discuss, going into executive session to discuss confidential trade secret, commercially valuable, confidential proprietary information not subject to inspection or those pursuant section 1-210-5 and 7-232A of the Connecticut General Statutes. This information is commercially valuable, confidential, proprietary, not subject to public disclosure to that Public Act 98-212. And to discuss personnel matters of an employee or employees and or public officials pursuant to Chapter 14, Section 1206A of the Connecticut General Statutes. And with that, we're in executive session.